The Atari Lynx was by far the raddest piece of gaming technology to come out of the 1980s. Although as radical and powerful as it was, that didn't mean that it was successful. Known for excellent arcade ports, it was not so much known for its shoot-'em-ups, although it did have a few, like Gates of Zendikon, Zarlar Mercenary, and Raiden. Today I'm going to review a new shoot-'em-up that comes to us from Songbird Productions. I have to thank Carl at Songbird for furnishing this review copy, which I'm mainly running on my MicWill LCD enhanced Lynx through a Lynx SD card. That said, I tried it out on an original Lynx screen and the results are interesting, although it's tough to show all that on camera. I'll get into that later. First, some quick history that I got from Carl. He said that Microvaders started as an unfinished beta hidden inside of the game Lexus for the Lynx, which itself was an unreleased game developed by Shadowsoft in the early 1990s. Songbird acquired the rights to both many years ago, but it was only around 2020 that Songbird owner Carl Forehand seriously began to look at how to modify the then unnamed space shooter beta and turn it into a full game. The original beta had one level, no sound effects or music, and considerable slowdown when all the enemies were on screen. Songbird also received no source code for Lexus, nor the hidden space shooter, so everything that was done here had to be accomplished via reverse engineering the ROM and hacking in new graphics code and music to create a full-featured game. As Carl says, we are super proud of how Microvaders turned out and hope you enjoy the game too. Now to check in with the manual, as it mentions here, Microvaders has 40 levels divided into 4 chapters. Each chapter has its own story screen. From the title screen, press A to advance to the story screen for the first chapter, press A again to start the game, or press option 1 to skip to the next chapter. During the game, use left and right to move on the screen, press A or B to fire, catch power-up to gain an ability to score points. And there's 5 different power-ups. Rapid fire, which is by far my favorite. The bomb, which destroys 4 enemies on the screen. And then speed, which increases your ship speed. Shield is temporary invulnerability. And then extra life, which doesn't pop up very often, and it seems like every time it does, there's always some enemy shots nearby it. That might hit me if I go to try and grab it. I guess if I was to complain about anything, power up with that would give you like a straight laser shot, kind of like in Gates of Zendikon would have been nice. But otherwise, it's fine. We'll talk a little bit more about power-ups later. So this is one of the few Lynx games that is played in vertical, sometimes called Tate mode, like Clax or Raiden. This is a bit awkward to play it like this while holding in front of a camera. However, I did test it out playing sideways, and that actually works too, since this is a single screen shooter type game along the lines of Galaga or Return of the Invaders. That said, when I played it off camera in the right position, the vertical position, I found it fine to play as intended and got farther along than trying to play it sideways. I guess when you have it sideways, with the text being the way it is, it might mess with your brain a little bit. As mentioned, there's 40 levels separated out in 10 waves each. Each section of 10 starts with that cutscene that explains a little bit of the story, but also includes a nod to Songbird's old Cybervirus Lynx game. If you press option 1 on the screen, as it mentioned, you can skip ahead 10 levels to the next group of 10, which is nice in the event that your skills are a bit rusty and you can't make it through the 10, which would, I guess, define me in this case. Along those lines, I've only managed to make it to the last wave once so far, as seen here, but I did get to wave 8 and 9 a few times, although for whatever reason I would mainly get stuck on wave 7 if I was playing on the first chapter. On the later chapters, I seem to make it maybe 3 or 5 waves in, on rare occasion maybe 6. Now each group of 10 or each chapter features a different background, different music, enemy patterns, and sometimes some new enemies as well. And the game starts off easy enough, then ramps that difficulty up at a nice curve. It doesn't get too hard too fast. Often you want to be lined up with the enemies as they're zooming into the screen to take them down before they become too large of a horde above. I was expecting them to move back and forth like in Galaxian, but once they hit their spot, they stay static until they do a dive bomb run. That said, they do dive bomb a lot more than in Galaxian or Galaga, and so I think that makes up for it. And there's also some enemies in the last chapter that do kind of sway back and forth, but I haven't encountered them earlier in the game. Since your shots have to be precise, you need to stay sharp, as there are a few times I ended up shooting at that tiny pixel-wide gap space in between the invaders and missing them. Also note that when they dive bomb, they will often double back in a loop, which can catch you off guard if you aren't careful. There was a nice surprise when I came across a chapter or level that changed things up a little bit, a third chapter I believe it is, from the typical Invaders gameplay to an asteroid-filled where you have to dodge asteroids while collecting stranded pilots. I was expecting that your shots would either slow down or destroy the rocks though, and as it doesn't, you need to be quick to react so you don't smash into one. The game splices this with battle gameplay though, after, say, the first wave, although the second time you're rescuing pilots, they start to drift a little to one side instead of falling straight down, thus keeping you on your toes. One thing I appreciate is that it's not really the same game twice, which is one of those things that Galaga did pretty well. There's some things you can expect, but then it will randomize things enough to keep everything different enough, almost like a pinball machine, or as I mentioned, Galaga, and that keeps it interesting and fun to me. And as mentioned, that includes power-ups. When you get them is very much random, and for the most part the game holds back on rewarding you too often with those, thus forcing you to stay focused on your precision shots. Sometimes when I've played though, it might be a little bit more generous, but for the most part it's not. And without power-ups, only 2 of your bullets can be on the screen at one time, so it's something to keep in mind. And so that you're not firing strays and then having to wait for when to respawn, so because you might need a shot depending on what's going on the screen. But old habits die hard, so I caught myself kind of button mashing more than once anyways. Graphically, it's a nice looking Lynx game, not necessarily on the level of something like Alpine Games, but still colorful, and there's some nice little details such as colors that change on the invaders when they're dive bombing, and nice little animations. There aren't any unique effects that we haven't seen before, or stuff that's like a tech demo, but again, it still looks nice. Of course, with the Lynx display being what it is, you can't expect too much detail from micro enemies, although there are larger ones with more detail that you come across later, or there's the asteroids which are animated and gives kind of an appearance of scrolling, or at least the asteroid sprites themselves are scrolling along, and those asteroids also remind me a little bit of the asteroids you find in the Atari 7800 version of asteroids, which was also lovingly called Meatballs in Space. But overall, I like the effect or the animations and the effects there, where there's also some asteroids in the background that you don't interact with. It just makes it seem a little cooler, more spacey-like. And also another thing that's nice about this, I can't recall what the hardware limitations on the Lynx are, but nothing's really coming to mind except for maybe Gates of Zendikon as far as throwing a lot of sprites on the screen. And granted, sure, most of them are tiny sprites, micro sprites, perhaps you could say, but game seems to handle them just well, along with a lot of bullets. Although once in a while the orange bullets of the enemies might blend in a little bit with their own orange color dots, and so that's where it just takes a little bit of practice to know when they're probably going to be firing in later waves to try and avoid getting hit, but you still might get hit anyways. Another thing I also like is the animation on the explosions. It's nothing super spectacular that you've never seen before, but it's just a nice little animation. In terms of the display, I noticed something interesting in that the colors are slightly different between the two models. The McWill shows that what you would probably expect in an emulator like Handy, but what is blue on my McWill screen turns purple on the original. Also, the original has that scanline effect, which does look cool in the retro 80s CRT or arcade sense, and there's some trailing or ghosting effects on the shots, which I like. In some ways, I also like how it looks a little bit more on the original screen. The only issue is that the viewing angle sucks, which affected every Lynx game that you played on the original screens. Is just the nature of that technology that they used from 1989. But as you can also see from the camera, everything also looks a little bit washed out. Now that said, part of that is just down to the age of my Lynx LCDs. It's almost 35 years old now, so you can't expect it to be superb anymore. I'm just glad it still works. Although it does seem to be slightly better in quality on the Lynx 1 screen, and control-wise it also seems to play slightly better there than on the Mark II model. But it's not like this drastic difference. The audio on this game is great, and I let the attract mode just play a little bit as I like the title music. And that music also plays on wave 10 of the first chapter. I haven't reached the final wave of any of the other chapters, but I assume it probably plays there too. The second wave music was probably the weakest of the bunch, but I don't have any complaints about the other songs. And I haven't played a ton of homebrew era Lynx games, but where you did have a few commercial release era ones where there would be no music during levels, it's nice to get that touch in this case. And also where this game would have really stood out in, say, 1990 through 1992 among other releases. Speaking of the word slight, there was also a slight difference in audio on the McWill Lynx versus the other two models. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just the Lynx itself, maybe it's just the speakers. I didn't try it with headphones to see what would happen, but it just seemed like on my Model 1 and my original Mark II that there was more treble, whereas on the McWill Lynx it had a little more bass. Again, might just be something down to the actual speakers on there. Songbird is taking pre-orders for this now, which is available in 3 editions. As far as which one to get, I'd just say whatever best fits your budget. Although overall, would I recommend this game? If you're into retro shoot-em-ups like Galaga or Galaxian, then absolutely yes. I don't know if this would sway you if those types of games aren't your thing, although given that the Lynx attracted a lot of 80s arcade players, I have to imagine you're probably into these kinds of games anyways. And had this been released back in the Lynx's lifespan, I do think it would still be highly regarded today, perhaps as a worthy heir to Galaga 88 on a handheld. Either way, I've had a lot of fun playing it. I keep going back to it and trying to find ways to improve my skill and getting to that end chapter. And it's one of those games where just something about it drives me to want to beat the game. And again, thanks to the randomness that's baked into it as well, it's something that I could see myself coming back to for many years. So double thumbs up from me on this one. Thanks again to Carl Forehand of Songbird Productions, and definitely hope you get a chance to check this one out. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.